Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final session on the water resource management and irrigation in Kansas. So this virtual workshop series were organized by the Natural Resources Program Focus Team at Kansas State Research and Extension and the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment. This series are also advertised as a professional development event in pairs. So extension agents or those interested extension professionals, so please sign up for that series in pairs. Stacy, please, next slide. So over the last couple of weeks, so we had 4 previous sessions and on the variety of issues related to water resource management. So this is our final series or final session, and we continue with the same format. So please mute your microphones and sign in using the chat session. We will have about 45, 50 or so minutes for 2 presentations. And please reserve all your questions till the end of the presentations. Our end time is listed as 9:30 a.m., but at the same time, if the discussion continues, so we will not end the session until it's over. And with this, I will turn it over to Stacy.
Good morning. I'm Stacy Minson, K-State Watershed Specialist based in the Big Creek, Middle Smoky Hill River watersheds out of Waukene, with drainage going into Canopolis Reservoir. First of all, thank you for attending this morning. We hope you're going to learn a lot about irrigation and urban water conservation. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Kathy Lavis. She has a diverse background that combines years of industry experience with her hands-on knowledge. She's a professor with teaching and extension appointment in the areas of sustainable landscape management, arboriculture, and horticultural irrigation in the Department of Horticulture and Natural Resources at Kansas State University. Kathy, I'm going to stop my screen sharing and let you share.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I apologize for that. Before I begin, actually, if you take it back 1 slide, so I don't have my readers reading, my viewers. So, you know, I've been teaching irrigation at the university now for 23 years. We were actually the first university to partner with the Irrigation Association. And I'm really passionate about water use, water conservation, and training these young minds to leave our university with concepts that would indeed help us conserve water. And what puzzles me so many times is that my students will come back, not all of them certainly, come back from internships, and they're very perplexed. The industry, on average, does not seem to want to embrace proper practices, whether it has to do with irrigation, planting trees, whatever it might be. And so it's very troubling. And Holly was actually a student of mine, and I'm just so delighted that she's in the role that she's in Haze, because she's certainly walking the talk. So what I'd like to just at least share with you today are some ideas about water conservation. But I had to also chuckle to myself because it kind of reminded me of when COVID very first started. You know, how many of us have ever before COVID ever worried about going to the store and not finding toilet paper? None of us. I mean, it was a given. So now we're all really cognizant of it. It's like, ooh, what if I don't have toilet paper? Well, thank goodness we're horticulturists. We can just go find a leaf. But let's take that a step further and let's think about water. So we can stock our shelves with bottled water. We can try to, save water. We can, whatever we don't want to. But in a time of crisis, if we run out of water, where are we going to get it? We can't go to the store. Next slide. So what I'd like to propose, next slide, please. What I'd like to propose is that whether it's you or a contractor, because I have no idea who my audience is that in order to be stewards of our water, we have to understand the plants, their water use, and the soils that they are planted in. We have to be designing quality designs that are installed correctly. Now, I'm going to pause for a minute, and I always say this to my students when we're doing a residential install. Here's the scary thing about an irrigation system. You can't see most of it, so people can bury their sins. So I always tell my students, if you open up a controller, an irrigation controller, and it looks like a rat's nest, you should be very concerned about what's underground. So they've got to be installed correctly. And they have to have routine maintenance. It's as silly as thinking that we can drive a brand new truck without ever having it serviced. So we also have to understand how much water is actually being applied. So let's just think about it in this note. I say this a lot too. There's nothing wrong with being a hose end dragger that hooks up a sprinkler system in the yard. But a number of years ago, I said to my elderly mother, she was so excited that she'd gotten her yard all watered. And she said, Kathy, what I do is I turn the timer on my stove, and I know exactly how long I need to run it in each spot. Then I go and move it. And I smiled at her and I said, okay, Mom, that's good. I said, so Mom, how long are you running that for? Oh, about 45 minutes to an hour. And my response is, why, Mom? And she looked at me and she's, well, I don't know. It just seems like that might be the right amount of time. And I said, here you go, Mom. We have no idea how much water is going down in that 45 minutes to an hour. So we methodically went out, we set out little catch cans, and we discovered that she indeed needed to run it for 45 minutes. So she had no idea why she was running it for the time that she was running it. Another thing that we need to be aware of is we have to update our older systems. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick view of, this is soil. Many people do not even give soil infiltration a thought. And I know this for a fact. Many years ago, in one of my first years that I taught irrigation here at K-State, I had a irrigation technician who worked here at K-State in my classroom. And I couldn't believe that Monty was taking my class. And I said, Monty, what in the world are you taking my class for? I said, you've been doing irrigation at K-State for years. And he looked at me and says, Dr. Lavis, he said, I have. He said, but I want to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know how to do it, but I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. And when he discovered that he needed to think about soil texture and run times, he was elated. Changed the run times out at the rec complex playing field and saw almost a magical thing happen. Next slide. So the contractor, so if you're homeowners, whoever you might be, here's some things that you might ask your contractor to find out if they really understand what they're doing. You might just simply, even if you don't know some of this, take a note and just ask them and see what their response is. Do they understand pressure? Do they understand flow? Do they understand how fast the water is moving through the piping system? Many people do not understand those three critical hydraulic concepts. Do they have any idea what the precipitation rate is? Now, for sprinklers, let's just think about, I just asked Holly this morning, hey, Holly, how much rain did you get out in Haze? She immediately told me how much precipitation they had in Haze. That's what we would like to do with an irrigation system, is know how much water is going down per unit of time. Does the contractor look at the site specifics? Are they irrigating turf and flower beds on the same irrigation zone? That's a big no-no. Do they understand some of the most recent water saving components, and are they using them? My guess is no, they are not. I'm not going to name any companies, but I'll tell you what, when I go to Manhattan, Kansas here, and I look for pressure regulated sprinklers, and they have to order them in for me, that tells me that very few contractors are even using those water saving devices. Next question I would ask someone is, do they understand distribution uniformity and efficiency? Next slide. How are they measuring PSI or pressure? I think this is a legitimate question. Are they taking a special pressure regulating gauge, and are they determining the pressure at the site, or are they just guessing it? I tell my students, if you don't know pressure and you don't know flow at the site, you cannot properly design an irrigation system. Next slide. This is an example of too high a pressure. The water is coming out of the sprinklers. It's misting. If we have any sort of wind event whatsoever, that's going to blow right off the site. Next slide. This is an extreme example, but a legitimate example of a playing field that one of my students brought back a couple of summers ago and wanted to know what was wrong. And I said, well, you don't have enough pressure. That's what's wrong. So both of those situations are extreme examples that have to be corrected, or you're not going to get uniform water distribution on a site. Next slide, please. What about flow? How much water, as I've already said, is going down per unit of time? What's the precipitation rate? I asked my students, how many of you have worked for a contractor on a golf course, whatever it might be, and have you ever set run times on controllers? And usually I get a couple of students raise their hand, and I say, well, how long are you setting these run times for? Oh, well, my boss said to set the rotors in full sun at 45 minutes, and the little sprays, you maybe put that at about 10 or 15 minutes. Here again, my question is, why? And they have no idea why they're setting the controller for those run times. I mean, that's ridiculous. If nothing else, use a product catalog and calculate out the theoretical precipitation rate. Next slide, please. Distribution uniformity. This is a term that we throw around people in the irrigation world. And what this really means is how evenly is the water going down per unit of time. And, usually what we do, I have clients, I have residential clients that I take care of. I know exactly what they do. They're smart enough that they can go out and they can turn up the run times on their controller. And they will do that when they see brown spots. Okay, so we know that we're never going to have 100% uniformity, but we would like to strive for at least 70 to 80%. The sad thing is when my class and I do catch can or audits on a lot of residential systems, we're getting distribution uniformities of roughly 50% or less. So we have a lot of irrigation systems out there that are not distributing water evenly, and then we're adjusting run times for those dry spots. Next slide, please. So as I've already said, factors that influence uniformity, pressure. If pressure is not addressed before the system goes in the ground, that's a big boo-boo. That's going to have to be fixed. Nothing we can do about wind speed or direction, but that absolutely influences uniformity. That's why I get very dismayed on my own personal clients when I arrive on their property a late Saturday afternoon, the wind's coming from the south at 20 miles per hour and they're running their irrigation system for some reason. Uniformity is also influenced by sprinkler type. So what type of sprinkler are we using? What's the spacing? That means a lot. Are the heads throwing head to head? And also, what's the rotation speed? Is it too fast? Is it too slow? Because that's going to influence how well that water lands onto the surface. And I've already mentioned flow rate as well. Next slide, please. This is just a quick example of what we would really like to have, and we will never have, this is perfect or good uniformity, where all of our little turf plants are real happy green, where we're just putting down enough water in their root profile. It's not going past the root profile, and it's pretty uniform. This is usually what we have in most of our irrigation systems. We have these little unhappy brown little turf plants. They're not getting near as much water. Then we're putting a little too much water down over here, okay? That has to do, like I just said, that's with our equipment and wind and that type of thing. Efficiency is how well the system is being managed. And that, like I said, this is all about management and run times. Are we irrigating too much or just right? Next slide, please. So watering efficiency, as I just said, these are management. Do we have sprinklers that are spraying way farther than they should be? Do we have the excessive run times that are causing runoff on a high clay soil? Do we have excessive run times? Do we have broken sprinklers? And many, many times we do have issues with our sprinklers. Next slide. I cannot stress proper installation enough. It is going to affect how efficient the system is, how easily it's maintained, and how long the system lasts. Too many contractors install without any regard to safety. What the heck do I mean by that? I mean things like sprinklers are installed too high. In fact, we were just walking across campus with my arboriculture class the other day, and my student said, "Hey, Dr. Lavis, take a look at these sprinklers right here. What do you think of that?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" I mean, when they're sticking up above the soil surface by, I'm not exaggerating, 2 to 3 inches, that's not good. And it's a safety issue. Someone's going to trip over it and break it. Okay. One other thing I want to stress about proper installation is that homeowners, you have a right to your as-built plan. Most homeowners don't realize this, but you've paid for the plan, and hopefully you have a good contractor who, if they're making changes during the installation process, they're noting that on the plan as an as-built, so that in the future, they know where components are in their system, or a new contractor would know. Next slide, please. This has nothing to do with landscape or turf, but this just pains me when I saw this at Home Depot a couple years back here in Manhattan. I went in to grab some plants. I'm like, holy ouch. And I don't carry my cell phone, but I ran back out to my truck and got my cell phone just so I could take a picture of this. I get it. They're trying to save money on labor watering plants, but they're watering everything except, maybe the plants are getting lucky. Next slide, please. So click it again. I think maybe there we go. Improper sprinkler installation. This happens all the time. This is a sprinkler that's set way too low. So when it pops up 4 inches, and if your mow heights are 3.5 inches, you're barely covering the flow of that water. In fact, some companies are actually starting to install 6-inch sprinklers in turf just to accommodate those higher mow heights that we do in the summertime on cool season turf. Something to think about. It does cost a little bit extra, but it might be something wise. This is just plain stupid in my book. This is too close to the curb. It's going to get hit, if it hasn't already, by an edger, and it's a trip hazard. So the sprinkler needs to be just at the soil surface. And what I tell my students when we're installing, it should be 3-finger width off a curb to allow for edging equipment. Next slide, please. Okay, most of our systems, go ahead and turn to the next slide, are not properly maintained. This is a severe example, but this is a real live example of a broken sprinkler and pipe that no one knew about. Next slide, please. This is just plain ridiculous. So this is incorrect arc. We can see that. This is with a good old a Rainbird impact sprinkler. And it's been doing this long enough that you can see it's actually warped the siding of the house. If a system is being properly maintained, at least by a contractor with a spring startup and checking, running through your system at that point in time, checking to make sure things haven't gotten, things happen, so they need to be checked. If nothing else, the controller needs to be run through and check the program one more time. And then I always say, it sounds silly to do, but make note of it when you're winterizing an irrigation system and shutting it off for the winter. You don't have to fix it at that point in time, but certainly make note of what needs to be done. Next slide. what this is really showing you is this is showing you a spray sprinkler that the arc has gotten off, maybe who knows how, but it's throwing onto the sidewalk. And the nice thing about this type of a sprinkler is you can just reach down with your hand, grab a hold of that turret and actually rotate the turret in the right direction. So now the stream of flow is flowing back onto the turf. Simple adjustments. Next slide, please. Typical homeowners, I'm not faulting homeowners by any means, but that's not their area of expertise. You know, that's as ridiculous as when I ask my banker a question. I don't ask my banker a question unless I don't understand what I'm doing with my money. So most homeowners do not think about adjusting their run times. Does your contractor do it? Here's a question that you can ask your contractor. Do you adjust my run times for seasonal changes? Most modern up-to-date controllers, it's a simple percent runtime that can be adjusted. And what you do is you simply go in and you adjust. What I usually say is I adjust my percent runtime for the average temperature of that month. Say, for example, in June, we might have an 80 to 90% runtime. So the controller can adjust the run times accordingly. You don't have to change the whole program. You just change the percent runtime. Next slide, please. As I've already mentioned, most people have no idea how much water is going down per unit of time. Next slide. So this is as ridiculous as, you know, trying to figure out if you don't know how much water is going down per unit of time, how long are you going to set the controller for? It's like trying to estimate without knowing how fast you're going when you're traveling somewhere. Next slide. Here's a great example, okay? So we have sprinklers that put down a lot of water per unit of time. This is a very innocent looking sprinkler. This is one of those, our little small pop-up sprays. They put down easily an inch to an inch and a quarter per hour. They're putting down a lot of water per unit of time. Our larger rotators, our gear drives, our impacts, they are putting down less water per unit of time. I'm going to say one of the no-nos I see consistently in our industry is putting these two sprinklers on the same runtime zone. No, 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 no. Now we've got these low precipitation rate sprinklers. Hunter has matched precipitation rate rotating sprinklers that do a really nice job of putting down water slowly so it can infiltrate into the soil profile, and it's putting down a lot less water per unit of time, which I know is a problem in our industry when we have water windows. But here again, something to be aware of. Next slide. Here's just a quick example of a catch can or an audit. So we run this system for a set amount of time, and then we actually take a look at what I really like to see is I like to walk around and see, am I getting about the same amount of water in each one of these catch cans, or do I have an area over here that's not getting any water? That's going to be what your contractor, your homeowner is going to water to. Are there certain things that can be done to the components to make it more efficient? If it's a poor design and poorly installed, the answer is no. You can do this with tuna cans, Tupperware containers. Next slide. Updating older systems. Next slide, please. Well, there are so many products out there, whether Rainbird, Toro, Hunter, Irritol, all of these companies are striving to produce products that help conserve water. We, the end users, need to be using them. We can use these climate-based irrigation controllers. I have people that will not put, Manhattan, Kansas, I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but I'm going to. They don't even have a rain sensor code that requires every irrigation system to have a rain sensors so it'll shut off during a rain event. Then I've already mentioned these low precipitation rate sprinklers and these high uniformity products, which I'm going to show you. Next slide, please. Just to give you a couple examples. Oh, I like this. This is from the EPA. So this is, you know, it's got the indoor things as well, but what I want you to see is a controller upgrade might cost around $400. This is how many gallons on average it can save in a year's time. This is how much it's going to cost. So, you know, that just is a feel good right there, knowing that you're saving that amount. Just a rain sensor. It just makes me crazy to see systems running in the rain, which, by the way, I saw 2 of them this morning. Those can save around 24, 25,000 a year. Next slide. Check valves. These are little devices that go in sprinklers that when the zone shuts off, all the water in the pipe does not drain out the low head. So it prevents every time we shut the system off, all the water drains out. Then when we turn the system back on, we have to reintroduce water and we're wasting a lot of water. Next slide, please. And whoops, back one, please. Yep, right here. So here again, this is just the inside view of a cutaway sprinkler. This just shows a factory installed check valve. It's a little device that holds back when the pressure reaches a certain point, it closes up and all the water can't drain out the system. And that little device and low heads can save thousands of gallons a year. Next slide. Already mentioned this. This is an example of non-pressure regulated stems. And this would be just the cheap ones that you can buy anywhere. Water's misting out. This is a pressure regulated. This is pressure regulated to 30 PSI, which is the ideal operating pressure for most of our sprays. Next slide. We don't think about this a lot, but there's certainly occasions when we can be using pressure regulated valves. A couple of years back, we did an irrigation install here in Manhattan, and I was very surprised to learn that the operating pressure was 90 PSI in this area of town. And so we certainly had to use pressure regulated valves and the other components that I just showed you. Next slide. If people are not using, if you don't have them on your own systems, we have wireless rain sensors now that are located a set amount of feet from the controller they're communicating with. We have really nice on-site weather stations. Next slide. And certainly we've got all these new controllers, as I've mentioned, you know, all these manufacturers, this is a WeatherMatic Smart Line. They're striving to do their best to make these user-friendly and conserve water at the same time. Lots of adjustments that we can make here. We can tell the controller what our soil texture is, what our sprinkler types are, and it can communicate to the weather station located right there on the site. Next slide, please. Just going to say a few things about soil moisture sensors. I know that we're not using those very much out in our industry. Those help monitor soil moisture, which is the best way. It's like driving a car without a gas gauge. You know, we're just guessing at what the moisture is in the soil. Done some really great research out at our Rocky Ford turf site. One of our graduate students has some really interesting data he's going to be presenting for his PhD defense. Next slide, please. I want to show you real quickly. Stacy, would you pop to the next slide and then we'll pop back. I just wanted one back. There you go. So this is drip irrigation. This is above ground. Okay. So what I want you to do is in your mind's eye, imagine this 6 inches deep. Stacy, go back to the previous slide. There you go. Okay. This is at the Koch Center a number of years ago. This is a median strip. This is with subsurface, back to the next slide, subsurface irrigation. You can't even tell, what is it? Keeps popping back, that's okay. Yeah. So it's a comparative, is what it is. This is spray sprinklers, this is subsurface. Next slide, please. What I will say about the subsurface, here again, we've done some great research. One of our master's students has just completed his research with subsurface irrigation, and he is seeing some really exciting things with germination of cool season turf, and hands down, the subsurface irrigation is performing better than the above ground. So in summary, to water well, you need to have an understanding of plant water use and soil. You absolutely have to have a quality designed, installed irrigation system that is routinely maintained. We must be updating our older components to the new. We've done that all around Throckmorton, the building that we really have seen some changes in that regard. And the other thing that we must be doing is we must be determining how much water is going down per unit of time. I'll end my conversation by saying to my students, couple of my favorite things I say to them is, we as an industry, our customers are going to do what they see us doing. And if we don't have time to do it right the first time, what makes us think we're going to have time to do it right the next time? And I remind them that if you're the owner of a company, if you have to send your crews out again to do something right the second time, you've paid them 3 times. You paid them the first time, you paid them the second time to go back out when they could have been at another site earning money. So let's think about what we're doing and how we can make changes to influence our water use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Obviously a lot for us to learn, and irrigation is something that most people still need knowledge and reminders and updates on, making sure that we're doing the right thing, watching the weather, and being cognizant of that. So next, we're going to move to Holly Dickman. She is the water conservation specialist in the city of Haze. She's going to talk about their water conservation efforts, some lessons learned, and what their plans are for the future. Some of you may know Holly. She used to be the Ellis County Horticulture Extension Agent for 10.5 years. And she's transitioned into this one maybe now for 3 years. I lose track of time. But fortunately for me, because I'm in the Big Creek watershed, I still get to work with Holly, which is great.
So like Stacy said, my name is Holly Dickman. I am currently serving as a water conservation specialist for the city of Haze. And believe it or not, I have been in this role for almost 4 years. It will be 4 years in July. And prior to that, I spent 10.5 years as the horticulture extension agent for Ellis County for K-State Research and Extension. So we'll move pretty quickly through this, and I don't expect to get through everything I have to share today, but I encourage you to go to our website, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But for those of you that aren't familiar with Haze, Haze is the largest city in the northwest part of the state. We have a population just over 20,000 here in Haze. We are the county seat of Ellis County, and we are home to Fort Hays State University, Haze Medical Center, and we get around 23 inches of precipitation a year on average. Of course, that varies, but that is our average, is right around 23 inches a year. The reason why Haze is so concerned about water conservation and why it's become such a way of life here, like I mentioned, is because it's had to be. This map just indicates that where we sit is just far enough east that we do not sit over top of the High Plains Aquifer, which the Ogallala Aquifer is a part of. So we are the only county in the state with a population over 15,000 that does not have a sustainable source of water. And our main sources of water, just to give you a little background, come from alluvial aquifers from primarily around Big Creek, which runs through Haze. And then we have also water wells about 12 miles south of Haze in the Shinshin well field, which actually is where I grew up. I grew up just about a mile west of Shinshin. So we actually get our water from groundwater wells from those alluvial aquifers. We also have some wells that can pull from the Dakota aquifer, but that water is not used as frequently or is blended with the other sources of water. As a result, as you might imagine, our weather plays a big part in our water resources. So if it does not rain, those well levels will diminish. If we have good rain, then we're in good shape. So water conservation has been a major priority in Haze for decades because of this. And back in the 90s, just to give you a little background, when this all kind of really took off, some of the city's wells actually were in fear of going dry It was a huge crisis, and so they decided to do what they could to save water at that time, and it's been going strong ever since. This is just a laundry list of some of the things that we currently do, and I don't have time to go over all of this today, but I will talk about some of these things. The 10-year average for water use in Haze is actually the lowest in the state. We use right around 90 gallons per person per day. And this is just a picture of a display we had put together for some of our outreach events to kind of illustrate what that looks like. But if you think about all the water that's being used, in 90 gallons per person per day seems like quite a bit, but actually that is the lowest in the state. And really with rain the last few years, that number has actually gone down. It's right around 76 gallons per person per day for about the last 3 years on average. This little pie graph or pie chart I have is just illustrating the water time or water usage in the summer months, those peak growing season months versus the wintertime months. And so we use about 1.2 million gallons of water per day in the winter months here in Haze versus the 1.9 million gallons of water per day during those peak summertime months. Now, I always like to point out that this does not include any private well usage. And we do have a lot of private wells that are being used for landscape irrigation here in Haze. Just to go through a few of the hot topics that we always talk about here in Haze, we do have water restrictions every season. So from June 1st to September 30th, there is no outdoor water use allowed between noon and 7 p.m. This is something that is enforced by the Haze Police Office. You can actually get tickets and be fined for this water use. And you start out with a warning. You don't get fined right away, but this is something that is definitely talked about and has been in place since the 90s. The wasting of water is actually prohibited. So we you can get fines for washing down of hard surfaces, having water leave your property. So if your sprinkler systems are allowing that water to run down the storm drains, then you can get a fine for that or warning first. And again, this is also enforced by the Haze PD. Now you can get special permits to do some washing down of surfaces. Let's say you're painting your house or needing to wash your windows. You can get a special permit to do that, but it has to go through our city finance office and the city clerk's office, and essentially me. The city of Haze also reuses water. We use effluent water to water our golf course, our sports complex, and to water any park planters, trees, those sorts of things. About 25% of our water use is actually reused as effluent water. And this is a picture of the effluent water ponds at Fort Hays Municipal Golf Course. So I won't spend a lot of time on codes, but we do have what's called the Green Plumbing Code here in Haze. And this is based off of the 2012 Green Plumbing Mechanical Code Supplement. And this is something that we're currently looking to update a little bit. But this is just, in a nutshell, making water efficiency as important as it could be in new construction, new irrigation systems, new landscapes, and things like that. So like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on codes, but I will touch on the landscape side of that a little bit. Prior to 2014, there was no landscape irrigation codes or ordinances. And the top picture just shows a full cool season turf grass area. No limit on how many square feet of cool season or how many square feet of irrigated landscaping there could be. But now we do have codes in place to limit that irrigation, and we do expect water efficiency at all new landscape properties. Currently, for any residential property, the max irrigated area of the landscape cannot exceed 10,000 square feet. Of that 10,000 square feet, no more than 5,000 square feet may be comprised of turf. And of that 5,000 square feet, no more than 2,000 square feet may be comprised of cool season turf. And so that's your tall fescue or Kentucky bluegrass, unless the area is not permanently irrigated. And so having a horticulture background, this is where I kind of get a little confused with some of the wording of some of these codes, because if you have a cool season turf grass lawn in Haze that you're not permanently irrigating, most likely it's not going to survive. For all properties, commercial properties, it does not matter what the plot size is. The max irrigated area is not to exceed 10,000 square feet. Of that 10,000 square feet, again, no more than 5,000 square feet may be comprised of turf. So we have a whole department that I do not work for that deals with these codes. And there's also a stormwater component as well. And we have a stormwater superintendent that takes care of all of that. But as you can see, it can get quite complicated, but in the end, it does change the way landscapes are looking, and it does reduce water usage. Now, some of the unintended consequences of this, and I'll talk about that, is we do have this requirement that no irrigation heads can be, or no irrigation can be within 5 feet of driveways, sidewalks, or other hard surfaces. And so this ends up creating these buffer zones. And unfortunately, in my mind, a lot of them turn out to be rock covered buffer zones. And sometimes this is an unintended consequence. And as you can see, this is just an illustration of an overhead shot of some of the neighborhoods in Haze. And you can see some of the landscapes that were put in prior to the irrigation ordinances and landscaping ordinances versus the properties. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but like there's some landscapes with these big borders around them now. Now, in my mind, I am wondering how efficient a kidney-shaped patch of turf grass can be with irrigation, underground irrigation. But this is some of the results of some of these ordinances and codes here in Haze. We have these big areas of borders and some very strangely shaped lawns in my mind. So quickly, just to move on, we do also offer lots of incentives here in Haze to help encourage people to save water at their homes and businesses. And I will quickly just mention those. You can look at our website for more information, but we do offer faucet aerators and shower heads at City Hall for free or for a very small cost in exchange for the old shower head. So if you bring in a shower head, you can get a new one that's low flow. We also have a washing machine rebate where you can get up to $250 back on a high efficiency washing machine. And that's been a very popular one that's been in place since the 90s. We did increase it last year, just recently, to $250 rebate for washing machines. And then our most popular rebate by far is our toilet rebate, high efficiency toilet rebate, where you can get up to $150 back for the cost of a toilet with a 0.8 gallon per flush. And this is the most efficient toilet you can purchase in Haze right now. And it's essentially the cost of the toilet. So you're getting the toilet pretty much for free. We are the only town in Haze, and actually west of the Rockies, I think, that has a turf conversion rebate. So we actually pay people $1 per square feet to get rid of their irrigated cool season turf grass, such as tall fescue or Kentucky bluegrass, to replace it with warm season turf grass, which is by far my ideal thing, buffalo or Bermuda grass, mulched planting beds with drought tolerant plants, and artificial turf, which as a horticulturalist, I cringe at, but that is still allowed under our rebate. This is just an example of one of the turf conversions that have taken place since I've been on the job. And just to give you an example of what might occur, this homeowner took out this large swath of tall fescue and replaced it with some organic mulch and also some shrubs. And I think they put in drip irrigation. As of last year, we also had a buffalo grass seed rebate where we would give homeowners $10 per pound of seed, up to 3 pounds per 1,000 square feet planting rates. And this is geared towards those lawns that maybe don't qualify for the cool season turf conversion. And so this is just a new rebate. Of course, COVID kind of put a halt on that last year. And so we're hoping that it will pick up in popularity. But I have been told there's a buffalo grass seed shortage this year, so we'll see how popular this one is. And just to mention, the city tries to practice what we preach. So all of our facilities, we try to be as efficient as possible, try to set that example. So this is just a case study. The Haze Public Library replaced all of their fixtures back in 2015. And you can see how much they reduced their water consumption. It was up to 80%. And just to give another couple of examples of how much water you can save just by doing a couple simple things. There's a local hotel that replaced all of their toilets back in 2018. And they went from, huge amount, 7,890 cubic feet per month down to 2,704 cubic feet. And then also this one I love because the convenience store simply changed out their ice machine. It was a water-cooled ice machine for a air-cooled model, and they saved a tremendous amount of water. And I need to go back and look at their water usage again to get even better comparison. And for those of you that are curious, a gallon or 1 cubic foot is equal to 7.48 gallons, but we speak in cubic feet here for our billing. And then the section that I am most excited to do, and my background's in this, is the education and outreach. We have a huge effort in that area. As far as I know, I'm the only water conservation specialist in the state. Wichita may have some of those types of employees as well, but we do a lot of outreach in various ways. Education outreach to me just equals communication. So if you're in extension, you are very familiar with this. You get the word out in any way that you can. And this is just a laundry list of things that we have done. Press briefings and articles and public events. And this is me and our mascot, WaterSmart Wally. We were at the downtown Haze Farmers Market here this last fall promoting WaterSmart landscaping, which is what I like to call it because xeriscaping is a confusing term to some. And like I mentioned, we went really quickly through all these, but we do have a web page specifically dedicated to water conservation in Haze. So if you go to watersmarthaze.com, you can learn much more about our efforts and our water rates and our ordinances and our programs and incentives at that place. Also, we are on social media. So if you would like to follow us or like us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you can go to @WaterSmartHaze and find us there. And I am a one-woman show with the water conservation here. I have great support from the Water Resources Department and my boss. And but sometimes if you don't see anything from me on social media for a while, it's because I've been super busy with other things. And like I mentioned, there's so many different things that we could talk about, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But these are just a few pictures from this past year. I've been trying to promote WaterSmart plants. And so I've, during the season, gone around and taken pictures of plants that are looking good, plants that are recommended for Kansas and Haze, and then with the hashtag plants for Haze. And we're starting to do more of that. I've partnered with the extension office here to put in a WaterSmart perennial demonstration garden along the outside of the extension office. So very happy to do that. And other things that just make this job so much easier is the partnerships and community support that we do have here in Haze. I work very well and a lot with Stacy, as she mentioned. And so having that connection with the watershed specialist, the extension office here in Haze. Of course, I have some history there. And then we are also Epa Watersense Partners, which is a free thing that any community can become. And then you have access to all of WaterSense's promotional materials, their campaigns, anything education-wise there is all available to you if you are a WaterSense partner. And so this is just a last slide here with my contact information. And like I mentioned, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, we have several questions. So let me get back up into the chat so I can see. When agents or anyone sees issues with a homeowner's irrigation system, what should they do? And I'm guessing this is aimed at Kathy specifically. And then what issues should be left for the contractor to deal with? and what examples could be easily corrected by the homeowner?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So Stacy, would you hit the first one again for me?
Okay.
Please?
When agents or anyone sees issues with a homeowner's irrigation system, what should they do?
Well, I'm not sure if that means, are they driving by and seeing issues? Of course, the first thing you do is check to make sure the homeowner's aware that there's an issue, because sometimes they are not. But I would go again to, I don't think, unfortunately, and Holly did a great job. I mean, I so am excited about everything that you're doing out in Haze. But you need to be using a contractor, like I said in my presentation, who has an understanding of proper irrigation use and selection of components and how to fix, components. Homeowners, there's a lot of homeowners that are very, very good about knowing how to replace sprinklers, how to set their controllers correctly. But it does take a little savvy. I don't know if I really answered that, but.
And then how do they know what they should work with or what they should leave a contractor to do if there's an issue?
Well, here again, I think that depends on the homeowner. I know a lot of homeowners that would feel very, very comfortable adjusting the radius, the arc of a sprinkler, replacing sprinklers. But I also know people that would have no idea what to do. In fact, a lot of homeowners, they don't even really know that there's an issue unless they're seeing an excessive amount of water. And I see Holly shaking her head. Because most homeowners, they just don't understand. And I've had some very heated discussions with homeowners trying to get them to understand, but they just don't. Unfortunately, they think if they can pay for something, they can use it. So here again, I would say that I would ask my contractor certain questions up front to get a feel for whether they really understand what they're doing. And I would refer to some of those questions that I pointed out to you in my presentation.
Okay, question for Holly. What's been the community reaction buy-in for water conservation measures in Haze?
Well, like I mentioned, back in the 90s when this all got started, and I grew up here, so I remember this, it was a necessity. I mean, we had to. There was no other option. We had to start conserving water. And so one thing I didn't mention is that our water usage, our population has increased, but our water usage has gone down. And back in 1979, I think that was the peak of our water usage per capita. It was around 187 or something like that per person per day, and gallons. And it's now 90, and our population has increased by over 8,000 since then. So, a lot of that has to do with fixtures being updated and some of these nationwide federal, regulations as far as toilets and things like that, for sure. But water conservation is very much accepted here. And we try really hard to reach kids. And, one other thing I didn't mention, because there was so much to mention, we have tiered water rates. So the more water you use, the more you're paying. So if you're paying higher water bills, water conservation is a concern. And so I feel like people have accepted it pretty well. I would love to see more outdoor water irrigation conservation. But like Kathy mentioned, a lot of that's just a lack of understanding about what is needed, what the plants even are, what they require. It all goes back to education. And it's a fight I've been fighting for over a decade. So.
We have a couple more questions. I guess, Alexi, do we want to do the survey real quick?
Sure. Yeah, Stacy.
Okay.
I mean, you guys still discussing and talking about it. I will just post that poll.
Okay. So the next question is, Kathy, for homeowners who might be overwhelmed on their irrigation systems, what's the best starting point? Like changing the controller, measuring the water applied, the soil type. what should they be paying attention to first, I think is what the question is, once they get their system in place?
I would, run times, irrigation run times is what I would look at. And here again, that's going to come from someone that has an understanding of how much water is going down per unit of time. But if they know that, then we can schedule run times accordingly. Having an understanding of the component that they're using is certainly going to help. Rain sensors, those are real simple updates if they don't have a rain sensor or one that's working correctly. I mean, I tell students are like, Dr. Levis, how do you check rain sensors? And I say, well, turn the irrigation system on, then get a ladder and dump a bucket of water or a glass of water on your rain sensor and see if it interrupts the controller. So I would start small like that. People that are a little bit more adventuresome, smart controllers with on-site weather stations. There's apps anymore that can be used. There's just really a lot of components that can be used to update a system.
Okay, one question is, are there any options for low turf grasses and shade areas? The understanding is buffalo needs full sun, and so we have a lot of trees, so not sure if buffalo would work.
Well, I'll answer that, Kathy, if you want me to, because I've gotten that question a ton of times over the years. Unfortunately, you're right. Buffalo grass does not grow well in shade, neither does fescue. So what I usually have told people is, you know, if there's any option to just mulch the trees, mulch the area, that is a good one. Otherwise, there's shade-loving ground covers that you could try to use. There are other options besides turf grass in some of those situations, and Kathy can add to that.
You know, I think Holly did a great job of showing that one redo of the landscape. I mean, that's tremendous. But even though we do a lot of research with turf here at K-State, there's just no turf that in a shaded situation, the tree is going to mind all the good photosynthesis, and you're never going to get a strong grass stand. So yeah, I would agree. Mulch, shade loving plants.
And then it looks like the last question is, it's for Holly. What will happen to all of the Haze water and landscape restrictions if the R9 ranch water transfer is approved?
Absolutely nothing. I've been told, I've heard this said many times, our water conservation efforts will not go away. This is how it is. Short and sweet answer.
Okay. So I guess I just want to make sure that everyone knows we will have all of the presentations for this 5 series available on our kcare.kstate.edu website. You'll be able to click in there and pick each day. And then thank you most importantly for being here. We appreciate your feedback. If there's something on any of the presentations that we've had over the 5 days, please let us know. You can email Melissa, Alexia, or any of the other watershed specialist crew with your questions, and feel free to reach out to the presenters, especially Kathy and Holly for today. Again, thank you for your participation and for participating in the K-Care Natural Resources PFT training events.